Hey y'all, it's Ashley at Book of Shrum, and I am back with another video. I won't even begin to tell you how long it has taken me to film this, or how many times I've had to try to film this. It's been a ridiculous amount. And yeah, so as you can see from the title of this video, I'm here to do my July wrap up, which I'm doing it in an on-time fashion, which I never do these things in an on-time fashion. We need to talk about the fact that I was in a reading slump from like April to June, and then all of a sudden in July I got my reading mojo back and read like 40 books. I don't know what happened or what sparked that fire, but I literally was like a reading machine in the month of July. So here we are, I'm gonna do the wrap up. I think if I keep this kind of energy up, I'm going to have to stop just doing everything in one wrap up. I'm gonna end up having to do it mid-month to supplement how much content I kind of have to go over. So we are going to do what I've been doing, which means that I am going to be covering the books first, and then I'll cover the graphic novels, comics, manga, and then also picture books in the second half of the video. So I'm going to try my hardest not to make this too long, because it is a lot of content to cover, but it is what it is. You know, when I get to talking, and it just kind of works out that way. So no stats. I'm still not feeling like in the groove of doing stats again yet. I just don't want to do them right now. I still haven't decided what I'm gonna do, if I want to pull any stats for the end of the year, but I just don't feel like doing it at the moment, so I'm not gonna do it. But anyway, enough about me and all of this stuff. Let's dive into the book. So the first book that I ended up reading in the month of July was a YA contemporary romance, and it was A Taste for Love by Jennifer Yen. And Jennifer Yen, I can't remember if this is her debut book or not, but this is the first book that I've ever read by Jennifer Yen, and it is a Pride and Prejudice retelling. It focuses on a main character by the name of Liz, and Liz seems to have everything in order. She's characterized as being perfect, except in the eyes of her mother, who does not feel like she has everything together that she should have together, especially in the romance department, where she does not have the type of suitor that her mother is looking for, particularly a young Asian man. And Liz has dated, I believe, quite a few people, and I don't think any of them have necessarily been Asian. So her mother inadvertently sets her up to meet and date these people through a baking competition, which is their connection. I think one thing that I really liked and enjoyed about this particular novel is the family dynamic. So it's clear that Liz and her mother have issues, but what she does end up doing is connecting to her mother through their love of baking. And I think that this is a good example of those familial expectations that are like impossibly hard to live up to, and that we try to live up to those standards, but it just never works out the way that we want it to work out. So I really enjoy that. I think it's interesting that Liz's mother always compares her to her sister, and you would expect that to be a situation where the sisters would not get along, or they would have some type of grudge toward each other, because there is another YA contemporary that I read this month where that kind of pinning the siblings against each other does harm the relationship between those two siblings, but it doesn't in this. And I really liked it that they had a strong relationship regardless of what their mother was doing. But one thing that did not work for me in this book is the actual relationship between the heroine and the hero. So clearly, like I said, this is a retelling of Pride and Prejudice. Clearly our hero James is supposed to be the embodiment, if I can get the whole word out my mouth, of Darcy. So he's not supposed to be completely likable, but I did not like the dynamic that they shared. They felt more like friends to me than actual romantic interest. So the romance itself, which is the core of the book, just doesn't work at all. I think that had their relationship been written in a different way, I would have felt more compelled to give this book a higher rating, but because of that, it kind of lost me with the romantic element. Like I said, I enjoy the family element, but for romance to be a big part of this book, it didn't work at all. So I only ended up giving this one 3.5 stars, which is not a bad rating. It is still a solid read. So yeah, 3.5. The next book that I ended up reading was How to Survive America by D.L. Hughley. This is I believe the third nonfiction book that I've read by D.L. Hughley. It's either the third or the fourth, but I'm pretty sure it's the third. And this one was really interesting because the second one that I read by him, I did not care that much for. Yeah, I think it was 3 because, yeah, I'm pretty sure it was 3. Could be 4, whatever. Either way, the last one that I read by D.L. Hughley, I did not enjoy as much because the way that it was written and the timing of the release made the book itself feel really, really dated. Like, D.L. Hughley was catching up to conversations that we were already having about race, and it could have been because of the huge discussions that were happening across the globe about anti-racism, that when he released his book, it did not feel like it fit within the framework of the conversations that we were already having, or that he was coming to the party late. Let's just put it that way. This book has elements of things that have already passed, particularly in his discussion about the treatment of the Black body and COVID response, but it's not dated, if that makes sense. It's still conversations that are happening right now, and I felt very, very engaged with the work. But like I said, this is his perspective of what it's like for Black and brown people to survive in America, specifically when it comes to health-related crisis. He touches on a lot of different things. I believe that he opens up the book talking about the renowned gynecologist who has had statues put up of him, and he was known to experiment and do different things on Black female slaves. And this was all without anesthesia. And leading with that, which is, I think, also a medical apartheid, that book opens with that as well. Leading with something so graphic like that, it really makes you zone in on the fact that this country has a lot of past crimes that it has not reckoned with just yet, and it is a great foundation to explain why particularly Black people have such a hard time trusting the medical field right now. And he does address a lot of elements of the book in terms of Black and brown bodies, but I do like the sections in which he goes into specifics about the Black experience, because if you understand the treatment of Black bodies in America in relation to what's happening right now in terms of like COVID vaccinations, and why a big portion of the Black community is very hesitant to get COVID vaccination, you like all of it makes sense. All of it is correlated. It's a perfect discussion. He talks a lot about how he feels about certain individuals that met with Donald Trump and how that hindered a lot of advancements and a lot of relationships that the Black community had with politics. He does a lot of great things with this book, and of course D.L. Hughley is a comedian, so naturally he takes some very, very grim topics and adds a slight comedic flair to them, not to make them any less serious, but it's one of those things where, like in some of his previous stuff, I've said you have to laugh to keep from crying. So he kind of works with that element in a lot of his books when he's talking about these very real and very traumatic experiences that Black and brown people have experienced while living here in the States. This is definitely one of his better releases. I enjoyed it, and I ended up giving this one 4 out of 5 stars. The next thing that I ended up reading was The Cost of Knowing by Brittany Morris. This is her second book. Of course, I read Slay. Slay was a 5-star read for me. It was a very important book for me. I know there's a lot of discussions always around this book about people saying, oh yeah, well, the technology or the gaming aspect of it is not realistic. That's not the purpose of the book. I hate when people say that. But of course, because I love Slay so much, I definitely wanted to check out The Cost of Knowing. I will say, going into The Cost of Knowing, you must be aware of the fact that this book contains extremely heavy anxiety representation, and I didn't know how difficult it would be for people to read this book until I read it myself, because the main character has severe anxiety as a result of the gift that he has. And because he has severe anxiety, the way that Brittany Morris writes it, which is also a testament to her ability to really capture an experience, The way that she writes it, though, it makes you feel very, very anxious. And I felt slightly anxious reading this book, and I don't have anxiety, so I am not surprised that a lot of people who have anxiety were triggered by a lot of things that were happening in this book. And it's of no fault of the reader or the rater or reviewer or whoever. It's just that this book in particular, like the way that it makes you feel, makes it a very difficult book to read, not only just because of the content, but just that aspect of it makes it difficult as well. So the book itself is about a young boy by the name of Alex, and Alex has this special ability where he can see the future of any object that he touches. It makes it very difficult for him to function in his daily life because anything that he touches, he starts to have visions about, and he does the best that he can in trying to navigate his life. But there are a couple of things that happen that end up kind of shaping and moving the story forward, and one is the fact that he sees a breakup happen between himself and his girlfriend, and then the other is that he sees his brother's death. He doesn't know how his brother dies, but he knows that his brother's going to end up dead, and that's where the anxiety rep comes in, because he becomes obsessed with figuring out or trying to prevent his brother from dying, and he's always anxious about, is this going to be it? Is this going to be it? Is this what's going to kill him? Is he going to do this and then end up dying? So you as a reader, you start to feel like, okay, is this going to be the moment? Is this going to be the moment? And it can be a lot. I do recognize and acknowledge that. What I believe Brittany Morris was going for is this representation of what it's like to be a black boy or a black man in America. And she says at the beginning of the book that it's a love letter to them. And I know that we have a lot of discussions about love letters and really capitalizing on black trauma, but I really respected and appreciated this because it's true. I think I have a completely different experience as a black woman here in America because of the intersectionality of being a woman and being black. But there are things I think too that are experiences of black men that I don't always 100% identify with. And this book captures that overarching anxiety that is passed on from generation to generation about that moment when you fear you possibly are going to die, or another black man that you know is going to die, because that's just the way it is in America. And I feel like at the essence and the core of this book, that's what it was about, and breaking that generational curse of fearing for your life that every generation of black men that is born, they grow up fearing that they're not going to make it past a certain age. Some of my favorite hip-hop artists constantly talk about that. J. Cole literally has made several songs, and I know this is not exclusively relevant, but I'm just trying to give you kind of a picture or framework to kind of deal with, where he talks about the fact that being a black man in this country, you don't expect it. You're not expected, and you don't expect to either live past a certain age or you expect to be in prison by a certain age. And that in itself does build this extreme level of anxiety. So she takes what black boys and black men experience day to day for a great portion of their life, and she translates it into this kind of contemporary fantasy type of story that really pulls and tugs on the emotions of the reader. She really captures those feelings. First of all, to be a black woman writing this story, I think is very interesting, because she just accurately captures those emotions and translates them into pages where readers, literally, you can go on Goodreads and read the reviews and people are like, this book is heavy. And not just the content, like the emotional feelings that you have while reading this book is heavy. And that is a real life experience for a lot of black men and black boys. So I thought she did an excellent job capturing it. This book is horribly sad. I mean, I don't have the words to really explain how sad it is because of the fact that I can't really tell you in terms of like spoiling it, but I did end up giving it 4.5 stars. Still not as good as Slay for me. Slay was a 5-star read, but definitely a great sophomore album. I was about to say sophomore album, a good sophomore novel. The next book that I ended up reading was Everybody Looking by Candace Lowe, and this is a book that's written in verse that is, I believe, semi-autobiographical. It focuses on a young woman by the name of Ada, who in the beginning of this novel, she is headed to college, but it's told in flashbacks. And when I read this book, I felt like the core element of this book is realizing how a lot of trauma can impact and shape someone's life in the future. And Ada has a lot going on. I mean, there's a lot of content in this book, and I need to do a little bit better. I didn't do it as much this month in terms of making notes of content warnings for a lot of these books, but there are a lot of reviewers out there. If you just go look on Goodreads who have listed the content warnings for this one, because there are a lot of content warnings for this one, and I think that it's a lot of complex trauma, and it informs how she behaves and functions, especially once she gets to college. She comes from a traditional Nigerian household. She's raised by her father, who is extremely religious. She does not have her mother present. Her mother has issues with addiction, and she does a lot to kind of pacify her mother in a lot of situations. Like when it's her graduation day, her mother seemingly gets upset. I can't even remember exactly what about, but her mother seemingly gets upset, and she attempts to make her mother happy on her day in which she should be celebrated. But you as a reader get to see exactly how that impacts her step by step in terms of the relationship she forms, the attention that she may seek, how she builds these attachments to things that can be deemed a little bit unhealthy, like unhealthy attachments. But I don't want to say this is a book that I enjoyed. This is one of those books where I can't say that I enjoyed it, and it's not because it's a bad book, but it is such a traumatic book that it's hard to say that you enjoy learning and reading about someone's heartbreaking and heart-wrenching experiences, especially because I think Ada spends a lot of time trying to appease others and trying to be everything that other people want her to be, especially coming from an immigrant family. I think she feels like she has certain goals that she has to achieve because that's what her family wants her to do, and she ends up neglecting herself, and there's consequences for all of that. And you see in this, like, everything impacts or everything affects everything within the context of this book. I wish there was a little bit more explanation and a little bit more discussion around the complex trauma, but I think that this was definitely a solid read. Once again, I'm so hesitant to say I enjoyed this book, but it was a very informative book, and I appreciated the story that was being told here, and I ended up giving this 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I ended up reading was Excuse Me While I Ugly Cry, and this is by Joya Goffney. This is one of my favorite YA romance contemporary books that I think I've read so far this year, and the reason for this is that it goes beyond a romance and contemporary. There's a lot of great elements in this book. It is a story that focuses on a young teenage girl by the name of Quinn, and Quinn is adamant about her journaling. She journals all the time, but she journals in the form of lists, and she keeps this notebook on her all the time where she keeps these lists. I mean, it could be completely random things that she keeps lists of, but it's a very, very important notebook to her. And she ends up meeting the hero Carter, and they're working on a class project together. And what ends up happening is that their notebooks get switched, and she goes to school the next day hoping that Carter has her notebook. And he did have her notebook, and then he realizes that he no longer had her notebook. So then someone else takes her notebook and starts taking pages out of it, or taking pictures of pages within the notebook and posting them to Instagram. And there's a ransom element to it, like she has to do X, Y, and Z in order to get the notebook back and for them to stop posting to Instagram. But this book has that kind of storyline going, and then the other storyline is this conversation about blackness, and not blackness in the way that we look at blackness in the eyes of non-black people, but this is how we define blackness within the black community. And that's an important element to consider, because Quinn grows up going to a predominantly white school, and she mainly grows up with white people. She mainly interacts with white people, but she's caught in a world where she feels like she's not black enough for black people, but she's also too black for white people. So it explores that element in great detail. It questions, what does it mean to be black? It throws in elements of, what does it mean to identify as black when you're biracial? And I think that Joya just did a really, really nice job with that. And I understand that everybody's perception of their blackness changes as you go through life, and everybody is not as, I don't want to say aware, because aware is not the right word, but everyone is not necessarily on the same path and journey in terms of recognizing and accepting their blackness as others may be. I think it takes time, and then when you throw in the element of being a teen and not knowing who you are in general, it makes things a little bit more complicated. Not even a little bit, it makes things much, much, much more complicated. This also, of course, has an emphasis on black love. I talk a lot about black love in the romance that I read, but I think it's also important to see black love whenever we're talking about YA books or middle grade books, or books that are targeted, that are YA contemporary, or not YA contemporary, just contemporary / romance for a YA or middle grade audience, that it's also important for them at a young age to see black love. And this was definitely evident in this book. I enjoyed this. I loved it. It was amazing, and I ended up giving this one 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I ended up reading was Wings of Ebony by JL. I had this book on my radar for a very long time. I finally got the opportunity to pick it up, and this is a book that focuses on Bree or Rue. I don't know why I wanted to call her Bree. I'm thinking of Legendborn. This focuses on Rue, who is a part of this magical world called Gizon, and it's an interesting book. So let's talk about this a little bit first before I even get into some elements that I really enjoyed about this one. This is a fantasy book, but it almost reads as though it's like a contemporary fantasy. So it is fantasy, but a lot of what happens in this first book takes place in our world, and we get glimpses of the fantastical elements through flashbacks. So it's not a completely linear story in terms of timeline, and I think that is an aspect of the book that a lot of people found difficult to adjust to, because of the fact that you're anticipating maybe this high fantasy and it's not a high fantasy. Like I said, for me, it read more like a contemporary fantasy, but that's beside the point. Anyway, Rue's mother ends up passing, and she is whisked away into this fantastical world in which her father lives. They don't really have the best relationship, but then there are some weird things that start happening both in this fantastical world and also the real world, where young teens and black teens are being forced into these criminal lives that they typically or normally wouldn't engage in. What I loved about this book, and what I will always say I loved about this book, is that it's unapologetically black. Okay, a lot of times, and we've had this discussion, I think, or I have seen this discussion, I haven't participated necessarily, where you will have some black writers who write for the white gaze, meaning that they write books featuring black characters, but it's written in a way that's comfortable for white people, and JL steers far away from that. This book is unapologetically blackity black, 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 black. There is a lot of not just representation, but even in dialogue. So there is a heavy use of AAVE, which I absolutely love, because I think it's important in terms of representation, not for Black youth just to see characters, but also to see some of these characters living their life experiences and talking like them. That cultural representation is important too, because you can write someone who is supposed to be Black by description, but by acts and by cultural elements they could be coded as white. And that's what we mean when we say writing for the white gaze, that a character is Black for the sake of a character being Black, because why not? But in this case, we don't have those elements. We have characters in here that are Black to be Black to the end of time. I think another element that I really loved is the relationship that Rue has with her sister. I mean, she was willing to flip the world literally upside down in order to make sure that her sister was protected and safe at all times. And that bond was just a beautiful thing to watch. This book is fast paced. It's a lot of twists and turns. It reads very, very quick. And I was surprised about how quickly it reads, because it's a little over, I think, 350 pages, but it reads fairly quickly. And it has some cliffhangers that make me super excited to see where the second book is going to go. I'm hoping that we get a little bit more of insight into the world of Gizan, and we get to see a little bit more of those fantastical elements. But I think that this first novel was definitely more of a setup. We're establishing characters, we're establishing the world, and I think we'll get a little bit more in the next book in the series. I ended up giving this one 4 out of 5 stars. Next, I read Ace of Spades, which is one of my favorite books of 2021. This has been slated as Gossip Girl meets Get Out, and it's so much more than that. It focuses on 2 students whose names I'm forgetting, of course. It's Devin and Chiamaka, and it focuses on the 2 of them, and they go to this elite school. They're the only Black students there, and they are just getting, I think, crowned is not the right word, but they're getting their positions as prefects. Everything's going well, and then all of a sudden there's this character called Aces that starts to send out these really obscure messages about them and things that they've done, and they're trying to figure out who Aces is, and they're trying to stop Aces. That's all I can tell you about this book, really. I mean, honestly, I can't really tell you much about this book at all, because that's part of the allure of this book, is not really knowing what you're getting into. I will say that it is a slower paced book, and I think it needed to be slower paced because it is a thriller. And when the pieces of the puzzle start coming together, I literally, like, my jaw was on the ground. And I think that the pacing, perfect pacing of this book is what did that. There's a lot of great character development. I think that there's some interesting elements done with Devin and Chiamaka, in that you would think, because they're the only Black students at the school, that they automatically would work together to figure these things out. And, you know, once again, likes to prove that Black people are not a monolith. we definitely just don't automatically click with each other because we are the minority in the room, and that's definitely with these 2. I definitely clung more to Devin than Chiamaka, and I think that's because of Devin's backstory is just, oh my gosh, it's so heart-wrenching, and I fell in love with him. There's great queer rep in this book. Great queer rep. Absolutely loved it. This book is on fire. If you have not read Ace of Spades, I don't know what you're doing with your life. Like, I won't shut up about this book because it's so great. I'm telling everybody, even in my personal life, if you read 1 book this year, because most people in my personal life read like 2 books a year, and I keep saying, if you read your 1 book a year, your 1 book quota, this needs to be the 1 book that you do end up reading this year. And clearly, I mean, from talking about this one, clearly I ended up giving this 5 out of 5 stars. The next book that I ended up reading was Just a Friend by Ashley Nicole. This is a Black love romance book, and it focuses on a group of friends. Our heroine is Harlow, and Harlow, it opens with Harlow going on this blind date, and the blind date ends up being like a hot mess. So she uses this guy who also is supposed to be going on a blind date at the same place to kind of cover, and they end up becoming really good friends. And then he introduces her to 3 other guys, and she becomes best friends with these 4 guys, and it's Ghost, Country, Demi, and Tuck. I couldn't remember all of their names. And they are like her protectors. They do everything for her. They take care of her. They pay for stuff. They make sure she has food. They detail her car. Like, they do everything that a partner would do except for like having sex with her. And she comes to a point where she's like, you know, y'all are great. I love y'all. Y'all are my best friends. But like, I want companionship with someone outside of just like being a friend. I want a little bit more. I want that emotional thing there. So what ends up happening is Harlow ends up somehow with one of the four. I won't even say which one of the four. They start to have feelings for each other, and of course there's a possibility of a fallout because of that, because all five of them are such a tight-knit core. I will always say Ashley Nicole is such a funny romance writer. If you've never read Ashley Nicole, I don't know what you're doing. She's hilarious. Her characters are always super well developed. I think that her plots and her pacing are always done very, very well. I'm always excited to read more of her stuff. I wish I would have read more of her stuff this month, but I didn't get the chance to. But I loved this new one that I read from her, and I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. So I ended up going on a Shay Sanders binge this month. I don't know what that was about. I think that I just had heard a bit about Shay Sanders and I never had read any of her work. She is another Black love romance author, and I read quite a few of her books this month. The first one that I read by her was Sand to the Beach, which, you know, that, you know, old saying, like, you don't bring sand to the beach. But it focuses on our two characters, Janara and Maceo. I think that's how you say his name. And Janara is very unlikable. Like, I would not go into this book expecting to like her as a character. She has her guard up so severely that it just makes it very hard for Maceo to even crack her walls. It's hard to enjoy her as a reader, but there's a reason for all of that, and it was a plot twist that I could have never seen coming. So she ends up going to the beach with her mother because her mother has met this guy online, and she doesn't feel comfortable with the fact that her mother is doing online dating and that she has met this guy online, and that she's headed to the beach in Charleston, if I'm not mistaken. She's headed to the beach in order to meet this guy and hang out with him. So she decides to kind of crash her mother's trip and say, I'm gonna go with you whether you like it or not. Suck it up. This is what's gonna happen. So they end up going to the beach, and then her mother's boyfriend gets pissed because he does not like her attitude, and he's like, well, I'm gonna call my son so that you can come and keep her company. And he does end up coming, and some interesting things do end up happening. I ended up giving this one 3.5 stars. The plot twist definitely was like the best element of this book for me, because I just did not really care for, I am going to forget her name, Janara, as a heroine. I didn't really care for her that much, but the plot twist really explained her character development and why she was doing things the way that she was doing, and I think it ended on an interesting note. So it was a fun and exciting way to start my journey of reading Shay Sanders. I ended up reading 5 other books by Shay Sanders this month. 4 of those books were in her On the Clock series. The first one is called Take It, and it's about Sloane and Keith, and all these books take place at this company, this Billingsley Co. company. So all of them take place there. You don't necessarily have to read these in order, although I am reading them in order because some of them do end up playing off of each other a little bit, I think. At least that's where I'm at in the series, where some of them are kind of playing off of each other. But this first one is about Sloane and Keith, and Sloane and Keith work in the same department. As a matter of fact, Keith is technically Sloane's boss at the beginning, and she thinks that Keith is attractive, but she thinks that he's kind of like whitewashed. And then some things happen, and I don't even want to tell you because it's kind of like a plot twist that made me like laugh so much. But it is an office romance, and it just kind of goes from there. There were some elements that I didn't really enjoy. I gave this one, I think, 3 or 3.5 stars. It was something I didn't like about the way that Me Too was kind of referenced in this book, because he was trying to let her know, like, I don't want to get in trouble for having any like office romance with you, and I don't want to get, he was saying like, I don't want to get Me Too'd. and she was saying like, I want me to you. I just didn't like that element of it. I didn't like the way that that was kind of framed, so that kind of deducted some stars from me. The next one in the series is Hour Hoe, and and this one is about Cairo and Taylor. And Taylor at the beginning of this one has just gotten out of a really bad relationship, or it was, I say really bad because he was super neglectful and he was a complete ass to her, but it was a bad breakup, and her friends are taking her out, or her coworkers are taking her out to this bar that's a part of the company to just kind of loosen up and get out there. And then that's when Cairo was there, and apparently both of her friends had ended up sleeping with Cairo or had done something with him at some point. So they were telling her, oh, you should just, you know, sleep with him and kind of, you know, get it out your system or whatever the case may be. So they end up meeting at the bar, and he's like, you know, I know your friends have told you about me or whatever, but of course it ends up being more than that once they start to talk and they get to know each other. I really like this one because I thought it was like sweet and endearing. There was just a softness to their romance that I really enjoyed. I think that's the best way that I know how to explain it, where there were these false expectations of Cairo, and he just ended up being this hero that had a lot of layers to him, and Taylor was able to kind of pull those layers back and really get to know him. And their romance isn't instantaneous. Like, they just don't hop in the bed and then all of a sudden everything's peachy keen. It's like they have some things that they're working through before they can get to that HEA, and I really appreciated that. So I ended up giving this one 4 out of 5 stars. I then ended up reading Shift Change, which is about Cash and Adriana, or Adriana, depending upon how you're used to saying it, but it is not a romance. It is an erotica. There's no HFN or HEA in this one. They are a couple that are like, they meet when Adriana is getting off of work and Cash is going into work. They still work for that company as our other previous couples. And what's really interesting about their story is that they have great sexual chemistry, but they have nothing else in common. And this book is really about them kind of coming to terms with the fact that some people just end up being friends with benefits, and there is no likelihood of a relationship at all. They may have that conversation, but they know at the end of the day, like, they're not compatible. They just have great sexual chemistry, and that's about it. And Cash and Adriana, like, they recognize that, hey, we have great sexual chemistry, but we have nothing in common. Like, he is definitely a little bit rougher around the edges. He grew up in a tougher situation, absent parent. He has a brother that's kind of involved in drug dealing and stuff like that, and he is in a tight position because he's working for the company, and when the company came in, they kind of monopolized a lot of stuff, which put a lot of the Black community in a really tough situation. So he's working for that very company, which causes issues for his family. Adriana is just definitely more, I wouldn't say uppity, but uppity is word. She's very high maintenance. She likes her designer things. She likes being comfortable with her money, and they just don't really have anything in common. And it works that they only have sexual chemistry. Like, that's all that they have. And you can tell that within the framework of this story, like, that's all that they're ever going to have. But it's great seeing them kind of work through that journey themselves and figure out, like, hey, you know, like, you're cool and we have great time together sexually, but even outside of that, like, hanging out with each other and stuff, it just does not work very well for them. But I did enjoy this one, and I ended up giving it 4 stars. The 4th book in this series is A Flick Between Friends, and this one focuses on Star and Lennox. Star and Lennox have been friends for a very long time. They also work at the company. Of course, everybody works at this company, and they end up getting furloughed. I can't get words right today. They end up getting furloughed, and they still need money. Well, Lennox is kind of in a good position where he's comfortable, but Star is not in a good position, and she has a grandmother that is in a elderly home, nursing home of sorts, that needs monetary, like, compensation to pay for her staying, and she can't take care of her grandmother, and neither can her brother, so she needs quick money. So she enlists her friend to help her make a sex tape. And I really like this one, not only because I think it's funny, but because I think Lennox is definitely like a more gentle hero in everyday things, And then when it comes down to like their sexual chemistry, Lennox is Lennox like shut her up, and I appreciated that because Star is used to being very dominant. She has a very dominant personality. She's very headstrong. She likes things the way that she likes things, and I really resonate with a woman like that. But she ends up making assumptions about Lennox in terms of like his experience with women and whether he can do certain things in terms of like them being in the bedroom together. And I was like, Star, shut up. Like stop. And I didn't have to say that as a reader because Lennox shut her up. And I completely appreciated that. But this is definitely a friends to lovers romance. And yeah, I thought it was cute. I thought it was really, really cute. And this is another one that I ended up giving 5 stars. I mean, 4 stars too. And the last Shay Sanders book that I ended up reading this month was Love and War. This is about Jada and Travis. This is a marriage in crisis romance where the two of them had recently separated, and it is the beginning, I believe, of the pandemic where everyone is starting to quarantine, and he asked Jada if he could come back into quarantine so he doesn't have to be away from their 2 sons. So he does come back, and slowly we get to figure out like what exactly happened between Jada and Travis that made them separate, and it's not what you think. I think what she does so well in this book, Shay Sanders does very well with this book, is that she presents one idea of what you think happens and you kind of go with it, and then the truth of what really happened comes out. And I'm glad that there were supporting characters who kind of helped them navigate that issue. I like that this book took place during the pandemic, but the pandemic was not the focus of the story. I haven't read many romances that deal with quarantining or the pandemic because I just felt like it was too soon for me. But this one does deal a little bit with the pandemic, but it really just isn't, you know, like them quarantining together. And I think at one point Jada talks to her parents and tells them like, you don't need to be going out in public that much. I need you to kind of stay home and really just, you know, if you need help with anything in terms of like ordering your groceries and stuff, like I will do that for you. So that I really enjoyed, and they put the romance in their relationship at the forefront of it. And this book helped me realize how much I really enjoy romance novels that have the marriage in crisis trope, because it makes them feel a little bit more realistic. It makes them feel like not all relationships are like perfect. You know, we have these HEAs, but what happens after the HEA? What happens after you get married? Like, you have to work to keep that romance going. It doesn't just exist for the sake of existing. And sometimes you have these rough patches that you hit, and you have to figure out, if both parties are willing, you have to figure out how to work through them. And this is a pure example of that. This is really, really short novella. Like I said, I enjoyed it. Ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I ended up reading was Made in Korea by Sarah Suk. This was one that I had been looking forward to in terms of 2021 releases. It just took me a while to get to it. This focuses on Valerie and Wes, who both go to this high school. Well, Valerie's been there for a while. Wes is moving around because his mother works with these famous K-pop groups, and Valerie runs a K-beauty business. So the way that the school is set up is that students can run businesses and they get to keep their profits. They get awards for running these businesses, and it looks good on their college transcripts. Valerie takes running her business very seriously because it is in reference to money that she wants to raise for her grandmother, her harmony. And I think that it plays a big role into Valerie as a character. Valerie's not a very like character, but Valerie is cold and calculated because she deals with a mother who's not necessarily cold and calculated, but a mother who feels like she's not good enough, or she verbalizes that she doesn't think that she's as good as her sister. So I remember, and I was saying earlier in A Taste for Love with Jennifer Yen's book, the issues with the mother don't really translate to the sibling relationship in that book. It does here, where the mother is comparing the 2 siblings, Valerie and her sister, and it does impact their relationship. So as a result, Valerie is extremely close to her grandmother, and it impacts the way that she deals with other people, including her own family members. Wes is definitely softer and kinder, but I think that's just his personality, and he wants so much more than what I think his parents have given him. So the family dynamics really do impact the way that these two function with other people and how they handle each other. I thought it was really cute. I really enjoyed this. This is a quick read. I highly recommend it. Ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I ended up reading was Neon Gods, which is the first book in the Dark Olympus series by Katie Robert. Everybody has been talking about this book. I've read Katie Robert before. This is the 3rd Katie Robert book that I had read. I know I have a huge backlist of hers to make it through, but I thought that I would read this because it was available in any place, so I listened to it on audio, and I thought it was okay. I ended up giving it 3.5 stars. I know that people are particularly like picky about their Hades and Persephone romances or retellings. I am not, like, I don't really care that much, but I found it interesting because, like, I like Greek mythology, and this is a Hades and Persephone retelling where Persephone is supposed to be married to Zeus, and Zeus is just not a great guy. I mean, Zeus is just not a great guy in general, but in particular in this, he's not a great person. So she ends up trying to cross the river Styx in order to get away from him, straight into the arms of Hades, and Hades is going to use her to his advantage. Of course, that changes once they get to know each other, and you know, there are some interesting elements in here, like public play is in here, and I think that they have a great sexual relationship, and I was really interested in those elements and the retelling aspects. But where the story falls short is like nothing happens. There's like no plot, like really there's like no plot until like towards the end. There's this constant fear that Zeus is going to retaliate and do something, but for all of that talk, like nothing really happens with Zeus until the end. I think for someone who poses such a huge problem for the entirety of the book, I feel like the plot could have moved a little bit more. I definitely feel like this one is more character driven. I feel like Katie Robert takes her time in building and constructing Hades and Persephone as these characters who build this budding romance. That whole thing with Zeus doesn't play out until the end because it can't, because we're so heavily focused on character development. I think I'm still going to continue the series, but I did not fall in love with this one the way that everybody else fell in love with it. I think that a lot of the people that I follow, a lot of people that I'm friends with, ended up giving it like 5 stars, and I was kind of like, why did you give it 5 stars? Because I don't see why it was given 5 stars, but I definitely, like I said, I will continue the next book in the series. After that, I read Isaiah Dunn is My Hero by Kelly Baptiste. So this is a middle grade novel, and Isaiah Dunn is My Hero is about a young boy by the name of Isaiah who lives with his mom and his sister, and they have recently lost his father. And this book is so powerful. It is so sad. It deals a lot with grief. It deals with alcoholism, and it deals with homelessness, all from the perspective of I think he's 11 or 12 years old, and he survives from day to day by finding solace in his dad's stories and poetry. And he himself wants to write, but he's just been having trouble finding the inspiration to do so because he's dealing with so much at home. And I think that this book itself is a true testament to how powerful children are when they shouldn't even need to be powerful, when they shouldn't have to adapt or withstand so much trauma, and they do, and they become so resilient. And it's unfortunate, but they do, and this is definitely a good portion of this. I think that the conversations related to his mother's alcoholism, their homelessness, because they go from living in this apartment unit to living in a hotel, which Isaiah does not tell anybody about, so he's kind of having to keep up these lies. And at some point you see like school administration and other adults start to catch on that something about what Isaiah is saying is not true, but they can't necessarily put their finger on it. And I think that all of those elements are handled very tactfully and are developed well for the audience that it's targeting. I think the emphasis on writing and grieving and memory of those that we love, that we've lost, maintaining that memory and honoring it and respecting it is also handled very well. Great elements of friendship and great just on top of what Isaiah deals with his family stuff, he deals with just average things that kids that age go through, like bullying. There's a young girl in his class that they just don't get along with each other, and Isaiah doesn't realize like how much he's impacted her, and it is really kind of a factor of why she deals with him the way that she deals with him, and they end up, you know, building this great relationship. And I love that, those friendship representations, because that's the only support system that Isaiah really has for a little while, is just his friends, before some other adults kind of kick in and then actively start doing what they need to do in order to make sure that he's in a safe and comfortable environment. And it's just well written. I loved it. It's an emotional read, definitely one that I think a lot of people should pick up, whether it's targeted for you or not. I ended up giving that one 5 out of 5 stars. I also ended up reading Fat Chance Charlie Vega by Crystal Maldonado. I almost butchered Crystal's last name, please forgive me, but Fat Chance Charlie Vega was another one that had been on my radar for a while, and this is one, of course, that has some really interesting elements in terms of fat representation. So Charlie is a character who, well, first of all, maybe I should say that this book feels like it's one thing and then shifts to another thing, and it's very important. It doesn't feel like two stories necessarily, but I think that it does feel like it takes on a little bit of a different tone, because in the beginning you have Charlie kind of pining for a guy that is friends with her best friend, and it's not to say that this guy has been actively mean to Charlie, but she really is attracted to him. And then there's some situations that happen between her and this guy, and Charlie gets really upset. And then there's another guy that Charlie ends up meeting, and they end up getting along really, really well. He asks her out, and this is not a spoiler because it's in the description of the book. He ends up asking her out only for Charlie to find out that he first asked her best friend out. And one of my favorite things that Crystal does with this book is that Charlie is okay in her skin. It's not so much about Charlie feeling insecure about her body, it's how other people perceive her. And I think that it's important to realize that no matter whether you're fat or average or thin or whatever the case may be, like, you can be confident, but at the same time, I think you can have your moments where you start to question that confidence because of how the world perceives you as a person. And Charlie struggles with that. And it's kind of hard for her to maintain and find that confidence and to not berate herself because her mother's not supportive at all. So Charlie's father ends up passing away, and her mother end up gaining a lot of weight together, and then her mother ends up losing the weight, but Charlie never does. And her mother's an ass. I don't like her mother at all in this book. Like, there's kind of a redemption thing that goes on, but I just couldn't get down with it because her mother, I felt like, had done so much damage at the end of the day. So it's kind of hard for Charlie to kind of find that peace and confidence because her mother is so awful. She does have a really good best friend, Amelia, and Amelia is kind of the one person that helps her find that balance, although Amelia does some really screwed up things too when it comes to Charlie's love interest, Brian. But what is good about it is that it makes a relationship feel real, because they both say some horrible things that, you know, it takes some time to work through it. Like, they have to get past the hiccups that they have. And as much as I love Amelia, I think that she has flaws, and those flaws are recognized, and they end up having the opportunity to work past that. And this book is about the romantic element that, you know, Charlie will end up having with Brian, but I also think it's about like self-discovery and that friendship element and learning how to find that balance between friendship and having a romantic relationship, because I think Charlie has wanted so long to have her opportunity at being in a relationship because it's always seemed so easy for Amelia, which it hasn't been, and that's something that they do discuss. I think she thinks that Amelia has had it so easy that by the time that she gets the opportunity to have this relationship with Brian, she kind of neglects everything else. She loses sense of self, sense of her own personal identity. So because of that, she has to figure out, like, you know, I'm glad to be in this relationship, I'm glad to be with Brian, but at the same time, like, who am I without Brian? I still have to have some sort of personality. So it's a lot of different elements. That's why I said, like, the story feels like it goes in one direction, but it actually goes in a different direction, and in a good way, because it covers so many different elements that I think were well done. And I ended up giving this one 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I ended up reading was Rent a Boyfriend by Gloria Chow, which this book was one that I just had on my radar for a little while, and I ended up giving this one 3.5 stars. It is a book that focuses on Chloe. Chloe ends up using a kind of rent a boyfriend service, rent a boyfriend service, in which she is renting someone to visit with her family and pretend to be her boyfriend, which is actually based on a real cultural thing that happens. And I liked that element of it. I think that the exploration of what it means to be children of immigrants, the cultural ramifications behind that, especially when you want to design your own path, you want to be what you want to be, you want to do what you want to do, you don't fit what mold your parents have set up for you. I think that is a huge thing. I know there are a couple of own voices reviewers who say that the Chinese representation, or the Chinese American representation in this book, is really, really good about trying to navigate what it means to respect where you come from culturally, but then also acknowledge that you're a different generation. That's a hard balance to find. So those are elements of the book that I really, really enjoyed. I think this book was way too long. Okay, like, I listened to this book on audio, and there were more than a few times that I was like, this book is still going. It's still going. There were so many moments where I think this book could have wrapped up and it could have ended, and it just kept going for the sake of going. And I don't know whether that was because everything needed to be tied up neatly and everything needed to be, I don't know, ended on a perfect note, but it was entirely way too long, and it made the story less effective, and it made it less enjoyable, because I think when, as a reader, you hit a point where it's like the story has done what it was supposed to do, you feel this sense of finality. But when an author extends that work and keeps going, you're like, we didn't need all this extra content. This could have afforded to been so much shorter. I believe that this book was close to 400 pages, if not 400 pages, and it definitely could have afforded to have been 100 pages less. It would have had the same effect. It would have been just as important, but not at almost 400 pages. It just did not work. So like I said, I only ended up giving that one 3.5 stars. The next book that I ended up reading was Cool for the Summer, and this is a book that is based on the Demi Lovato song Cool for the Summer, which is interesting because I believe that Demi Lovato released this song at a time when they were trying to allude to the fact that they might be bisexual. They have since now identified as pansexual and non-binary. So the story itself focuses on a young girl by the name of Laura who is so obsessed with this guy named Chase. She's been obsessed with him for a very, very long time. And when she starts school back again, they end up having the opportunity to really get to know each other and possibly date, but she's hesitant because she shared this really romantic summer with this girl named Jasmine who ends up attending her school. So she ends up having these really complex feelings about what she wants to do, because she has never been attracted to a woman before, but she clearly has this attraction and these feelings for Jasmine. And I really, really enjoyed this one because of the fact that I think that the author, Dahlia Adler, does a really good job pushing forward the idea that bisexuality is not as straightforward as people like to make it. I think that, of course, there's bi erasure, and there are a lot of people who believe that people who identify as bisexual are greedy, or if you're bisexual, you prefer each sex equally, which is not true. There's more than one way to be bisexual, and our main character Laura definitely learns this because she has friends that are definitely a part of the LGBTQIA plus community, and she still does not use that as a way to say, okay, well, I knew all along that I was bisexual, because her bisexuality does not present itself the same way that she's seen it in some of her friends. And I think that it's really interesting how this story unfolds and how she deals with this kind of love triangle, but it's not so much a love triangle, because if you know me, you know that like I'm not a huge fan of love triangles and YA contemporary romances. And it's not so much that it's a love triangle, that I feel like it is actually this whole process in which she's navigating her own identity. I mean, I guess you could call it a love triangle, because at the end of the day, she's trying to figure out who she's more interested in, but she's also trying to discover a lot about herself in the process. And it's very interesting to watch her go through this journey. And while you're reading the story, you get flashbacks of the experiences that Laura and Jasmine had together over the course of that summer, and how that's currently translating to the experiences of Jasmine being at her school now, and she had no idea that she was going to be coming to school. This was well written. I was really happy to finally read this book. I didn't know if I was going to be able to get to this one this year, but I'm glad that I did, and I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. The last book that I ended up reading in the month of July was She Drives Me Crazy by Kelly Quinlan. So this is about our main character by the name of Scotty, who is a basketball player, and she ends up losing this basketball game to her ex. And when she's leaving, I believe, that basketball game, she gets into a car accident with another girl that goes to her school, a cheerleader by the name of Irene. And Irene is supposedly, from the perspective of Scotty, like really, really mean, and the two of them don't get along. There is a past situation that ends up happening, and Scotty does not forgive Irene for it, but their parents end up getting along after the car accident, and they suggest that Irene starts carpooling with Scotty to get to school because she no longer has her car. And as they start to get to know each other, Scotty realizes that she wants the chance to kind of get back with her ex, and she realizes that her ex is jealous because of the fact that she's spending time with Irene. So she tries to cut this deal with Irene that she'll help her with a deductible for her car insurance because of the accident, and that in turn she will help Scotty make her ex jealous. And it's really interesting because it has that love don't cost a thing type of vibe, which is the Nick Cannon version. The original 80s version, I think, is Money Can't Buy You Love. So both of those movies, anyway, it has that vibe to it where, like, Scotty, who is kind of like a misfit, is using Irene's popularity to kind of draw her ex back in, and she's willing to give Irene money in order to do that. But of course things end up changing, and this is an interesting enemies to lovers because of the fact that I think that it's a breakdown of character. So we have these kind of perceptions of Scotty and of Irene, and as they get to know each other, we get to learn more about each character, which makes them fully fleshed out and fully developed, which I really, really did enjoy, especially in terms of the character development of Irene. I think Irene is looked at in a certain way, especially because it's through Scotty's perspective, and Irene is trying to become student athlete of the year. She's a cheerleader, and I think there are some stereotypes that are aligned with her as a character. However, as Scotty gets to know her, readers also get to know her, and you get to see how much Irene has really been through. And it's a lot of conversations about coming to terms with your sexuality, and it's just dealing with the normal things that come with high school crap, like bullying, for example, and Scotty kind of learning, like, you really do have a toxic ex. Do you really want to get back with this person? So it's a lot of self-discovery. The romance is really, really endearing and really, really sweet. It's something that I think they both end up having to recognize and work towards, and it just was well written, really, really quick read, and I ended up enjoying this one and giving it 4 stars as well. All right, so now we're going to slide into the comics, graphic novels, manga, and picture books that I read, if I didn't already read enough. So the first manga that I read in the month of July was Love in Focus Volume 1, and this is about a girl by the name of Mako who was invited to go to this club house. It's like the photography club has this shared house that is both for young men and young women, and she's invited there by her childhood best friend. They're super close. They learned photography together. Her grandfather, I believe, taught both of them, and she goes there, and then she meets another housemate. It's another guy, and he's super mysterious, and she can't seem to figure out like why he's mysterious. And then she realizes that he's extremely photogenic, and they want to like make this deal for her to be able to photograph him, and they end up getting along even though he seemingly like isolates himself from everybody else. And the ending scene of this one really makes it interesting because I didn't know if it was going to be a love triangle or not, but I think this is a short series, probably only like 3 volumes, but I definitely did enjoy. The artwork was pretty. I love the photography elements that were included outside of the romantic elements, and it made it a little above the average of a typical like shoujo manga. I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. The next manga that I ended up reading was Doughnuts Under a Crescent Moon, and this focuses on 2 characters, Uno and Asahi. And Uno is really into makeup and all this other stuff, and she does that as a way to kind of deal with or cope with the possibility of being alone for the rest of her life. She doesn't want to be alone, but she doesn't do well with relationships, and then she meets Asahi, and they actually end up getting along very, very well. The beginning of a romance is definitely implied. It doesn't necessarily happen in this first volume, but the Doughnuts Under Crescent Moon is really cute because of the fact that they do end up having donuts under a crescent moon, and it's about them kind of getting to know each other. You can see these feelings starting to develop between the 2 of them, and I think it's just a cute office place or workplace romance. And I think that the second volume may be out by now. I can't remember, but I definitely enjoyed this, and I think I heard about this through Shay over at Shay Geeks Out, so I will be picking up volume number 2 and ended up giving this one 4 stars. I then read a couple of picture books. The first one that I read was Hello Dark by Wei Mei Wong, and this is a quick analysis of a young boy's fear of the dark, where the dark shifts from something that he should fear to becoming a friend. I think this is a good picture book for parents who are looking for supplemental materials to help their kids kind of navigate that fear of being in the dark. The artwork was beautiful. It was definitely rich in like darker hues of like blues and blacks and purples because of the nighttime, and just is just one that I think that a lot of people should have in their repertoire or their collection. I ended up giving this one 4 out of 5 stars. The next one that I ended up reading was Sky Blue Bench, and this one is by Barum Rahman, and it's about a young girl from Afghanistan that is returning to school after she lost her leg to the mines that are in Afghanistan. And when she has her prosthetic leg in, she realizes that she has a hard time adjusting to being in school, like being comfortable in terms of like physical comfort, like sitting down, because there's no tables or anything like that. They're sitting on the floor. She tries leaning up against the wall. She tries a number of things, and she just can't get comfortable. So she decides that they should have a bench within their school. What I love about this one is that it not only takes the time to address just these kind of like sleeper mines that are still in Afghanistan today, which kids end up playing around these mines unknowingly, and they end up exploding, and children either end up dying or they end up losing limbs. It not only talks about that, but it also addresses the difficulty that young women in Afghanistan have in attempting to get an education, and knowing that an education is a way out. In the beginning of the book, you can kind of see that our main character is highly aware of the fact that she needs to get an education, and she doesn't want to stop her prosthetic leg, like the discomfort that she feels with the prosthetic leg, to stop her from getting education. She knows that it's important and that a lot of girls don't get that opportunity, but it's kind of about finding that balance. I thought it was a very, very powerful book, unlike any picture book that I've read so far, and I love the artwork, very bright. I think that the capturing of Afghanistan as a whole in terms of just different kind of like splash pages in the picture book was really, really great. I ended up giving this one 5 out of 5 stars. I also ended up reading Crown with Glory by Dorina Williamson, and this is another picture book if you are looking for positive black hair representation in children's books. This is one that is coming out next year, I believe. I should also say that those other 2 books are not out yet. I can't remember the release date on those, but I know that Crown of Glory does not come out until early next year. And this, of course, like I said, positive black hair representation. It focuses on a young girl who gets all of these different black hairstyles. That it's so nice to see that on page, y'all. It's so nice to see that on page. It's nice to see that this book focuses on black girl joy, and I think that it was great because it shows the progression of our main character from like not completely 100% like hating her hair, but like not having a strong affinity for her hair, to growing to loving it and appreciating it and seeing the versatility of her hair. I gave this one 4 out of 5 stars. There were some issues that I had with the rhyming scheme that kind of disrupt the flow of the picture book, which in picture books I review them a little differently because there's certain elements that I'm looking for, and the way that picture books flow, especially if they have a rhyming pattern, are extremely important for reading purposes, literacy purposes, when kids pick them up. So I found some issues with the rhyming scheme in this one that disrupted the flow of the text, but overall I thought the representation, the presenting of the story itself was really, really good. I thought the art was just phenomenal. It was beautiful, so rich and deep in color, and such accurate depictions of the versatility of black hair. So if you're looking for one of those picture books to add to your collection, or if you want to read it, or if you know some little ones that possibly need it, this is the book that you should check out. The next one that I have, picture book that I have, is Where Thuong Keeps Love, and I'm probably saying her name wrong, but this is a book that is supposed to illustrate the cultural differences and the way that parents express love. I think that what this was going for is that in some cultures, parents are very vocal about their love. Like, they constantly say like, I love you, and it is the way that a lot of parents end up showing their love, is they say I love you, where in some cultures it's not as common to find that I love you or that warmth that you may get, but it's shown in different ways and other things that those parents end up doing. And that's what this book is supposed to capture. I think that the way that it is structured, where you have the main character kind of asking like, how do these other kids know how their parents love them, it takes away from that message a little bit. I think it gets convoluted and it gets lost in the entire purpose of it. I think if the author would have strictly focused on the Vietnamese culture in this book, which is the young girl in this book is Vietnamese, I think if that would have been the primary focus, instead of like kind of making the message not obsolete is not the word I'm looking for, but kind of just making the message general and not so specific, I think the meaning of what the book is supposed to do does get lost. That probably makes no sense, but the meaning of this book was supposed to be the distinction between the different ways in which parents show their love, specifically when we're talking about cultural representations. And I feel like it gets lost in translation in this book, which took away from the overall power that this book could have had, and I only ended up giving this one 3.5 stars. This one should be out by the time that I put up this wrap up. It should have already been released, I'm thinking. Maybe not, it may not come out till September, but it'll be out soon. So I also ended up reading 4 comics, which I'm not going to get too far into. This is from Marvel's Ultimate line. If you didn't know, Marvel's Ultimate line is a way for, or it was a way for them to create kind of a pathway into the Marvel universe that was accessible to new readers. And a lot of these are kind of misses. The Ultimates, a lot of it I feel like are misses. Some of them are hits, but for the most part I feel like they're misses. I ended up reading Ultimate X-Men volume 18 and 19. I believe that 18 specifically deals with what happens as a result of Cable taking Professor X away to help prepare him to meet Apocalypse. We get to see a little bit of Jean Grey as the Dark Phoenix in that one. In volume 19 we see a completely different storyline, which is kind of weird how it transitions, and this focuses on a drug that makes mutants more powerful, but it's extremely addictive, and it's just a weird thing. A lot of this that I read for this was extremely weird. Ultimate Origins I did not like at all. This is by Brian Michael Bendis, where we get to see the origins of some of what you probably would know as the Avengers, so like Captain America and stuff like that. But this one specifically focuses on the origin story of Nick Fury, and Nick Fury serves in the military. He actually was the first super soldier before Captain Marvel, and this had the potential to talk a little bit about what happens when you are looking at experimentation on black bodies, because that's what ends up happening to Nick Fury. But Brian Michael Bendis drops the ball when he allows Nick Fury to state that he's partially responsible for the experimentation on his body during that time in history, because he wasn't following rules. Like, we don't do victim blaming. I didn't appreciate that. That was a great opportunity to open up the gateway for how they were treating black soldiers during like World War I or World War II, as opposed to the treatment of white soldiers. And even in a Marvel or a superhero universe like Marvel, there was a difference between how Captain America came to be and how Nick Fury is a super soldier technically, but because of the treatment of the different races, you would have never known that. Great storyline. A lot of that is kind of touched upon in Winter Soldier, Falcon and Winter Soldier on the TV show on Disney Plus, but this was reading it as a comic form and I didn't really enjoy it. I got to read Ultimate Hulk Annual, which was a complete waste of time. There's no purpose in reading that at all. This is a random story which I don't even really want to tell you about, because there's nothing really to say except it really focuses on another character that's not a part of anything really related to the Ultimate line. I can't even remember her name, to be honest with you. And she is new to Earth, and she ends up meeting with the Hulk, and the Hulk and her come into, well, she's already in the diner. He comes into the diner and he doesn't have any clothes on, and she's like, you need to put clothes on, or whatever the case may be, and they end up battling it out, and then they have sex at the end of the it's dumb. It was dumb. It was so dumb. Okay, so actually I said that was it for the books, but I actually forgot to include a book, and that was The Cousins by Karen M. McManus. This is her latest release. If you did not know, Karen McManus is well known for her work that she does on thrillers and mysteries for the age categorization of YA. The Cousins is literally about three cousins who get these mysterious letters from a grandmother that they've all never met after she has disowned all of her kids, and they are supposed to go to the resort where she stays. She has an estate there, but it's also a resort, and they're supposed to go there and work, and they really don't want to do it, but their parents see this as a great opportunity for them to make amends for the crap that they have done, and it's a great way for them to get back in their mother's good graces, which it's a long conversation about that. This one was not as strong as the last Karen McManus book that I read. There were a couple of reveals in this one, and I think that some of them were interesting, especially when we're talking about character development, and then some of the big reveals at the end. But Karen McManus is one of those authors who usually can pull a review that you do not see coming. Like, it usually comes out of left field. Her last book, literally, there was a final reveal that was made probably within the last 2 pages of the book that I did not see coming, that made it such a great read. I think because I love that element so much, I spent a great portion of the book waiting for like a reveal that I could not see coming, and I didn't get that. I'm not saying that some of the major reveals weren't good, but I wasn't as drawn into this one as I had been in other books. I think that, of course, once again, you're getting good character studies of this family, and it really is about family drama. And I think I saw a review that makes sense, that if you read this as a thriller, you're going to be disappointed, but if you read this as like a mystery / family drama, you probably will get more out of it. I just may not be the one for family dramas. I look for that thrillery, like murder type of thing, which, I mean, you do get that in there, but not in the traditional way that she typically does it. What is unique is that this book is told from 3 different perspectives, which is from the cousins, and then you get a 4th perspective, which is from the pass, but it is the perspective of one of the cousin's mothers, and it's very, very important to the narrative. But like I said, not my favorite Carrie McManus book, but I did end up giving it 3.5 stars. The next thing that I ended up reading was Cheer Up by Crystal Frazier. This is a new graphic novel that's about to come out. Hasn't come out yet, but it does come out, I think, sometime at the end of this month. Somewhere in this month it does come out, but it hasn't released just yet. And this is about two characters who end up on a cheerleading squad. One of the characters is a trans girl who's on the cheerleading squad, had been on the cheerleading squad for a while, but struggles a lot with school, but excels in cheerleading and wants to be more social, wants to fit in, is very, very quiet. And our other character does not want to cheerlead, is good at school, but is not good with social skills. And these two main characters have been friends before, but I think that they kind of lost touch with each other. And our main character that is trans is struggling a lot with just certain things in terms of like people using them to either, like, for in cheerleading, for example, like boost the fact that there's such a diverse group and getting them on the news, or like there's a young man that's at the school that constantly hits on her and it makes her feel very, very uncomfortable, but she doesn't know how to stand up for herself. But I really, really love this because it is about self-discovery, it's about friendship, it's about learning to stand up for yourself. I think that it is a great budding romance. I think, of course, the queer rep is amazing. The artwork is really beautiful. It's vibrant. It's more on the like paler hues, but it still works very, very well. I think the combination of it being about cheerleading and about queerness and about how you deal with your queerness in terms of how people perceive you. So I think everybody handles it differently. Like, and you could see that within the two characters. Like, one character is very just kind of like headstrong, very open, I don't care what people think. And then another character you have is just very like, I'm very, very hypersensitive to what people think about me, what my parents think about me, and being trans. Like, with that character, their parents are extremely overprotective because they know the way that the trans community has been treated and continues to be treated, so they're extremely worried for their daughter, but it is overbearing and suffocating and does not give them the opportunity to grow and to develop into their own person. But I really enjoyed it. I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. I then read My Boyfriend in Orange, and this is an interesting manga. It is about a young girl who is kind of, she's just an interesting character in general. Like, it opens with her trying to smoke a cigarette during a fire drill, and she gets rescued by this firefighter, and it is an age gap. Nothing happens within this first volume. It's very much so like she becomes slightly obsessed with him because he ends up saving her life, and then she realizes that she has feelings for him. She wants to get to know him, and he's like, no can do, I don't want to do this. Like, just stay out of trouble, mind your business, and leave me alone. And it's clearly attributed to something that's happened to him in his past, like, because it's hinted at from his co-workers at the I guess the fire department. They kind of hint at like, you need to just have fun, and she wants to get to know him, but he just is like, no, I think I'm good on that. So it's a lot of pining going on, but I think that if you like age gap romances, then you probably would enjoy this manga. I probably will be checking out the next volume sometime this month, and I ended up giving that one, I believe, 4 out of 5 stars. After that, I ended up reading volumes 2, 3, and 4 of My Boss's Kitten, which these volumes have gotten so much better. So when I read volume 1, which was like in December of last year, I was like, I don't think I'm gonna like this. It's about a woman who works for this man, of course, that's her boss, and they both are going through separate issues. He is recently divorced. She was left at the altar by her fiance, or they just never got married, or something along the lines where her fiance no longer wanted to marry her. So they're dealing with that, and the old house that her and her fiance had is where her boss now currently lives, and I don't think she realized that they had sold the property, so she was there. It ended up being this big confusing thing, and then it's clear that the boss wants to date her to some extent or have a sexual relationship with her, and of course it develops into more than that. But I didn't really feel anything with the third one, but as we keep going forward, I'm feeling more. about these. Like, I'm really enjoying them. There's some interesting things that are happening. Like, she's really shy. She doesn't like her physical body. Like, she's embarrassed by it, which is interesting because they do have sex like on pages. This is a very steamy, smutty manga, and she's very hesitant about it, I think, because she's embarrassed. But he attempts to kind of like calm her down and get her to relax, and they end up having this really great mutual respect for each other, and there's this love that's building between the two of them. And throughout these, you know, volumes, there are a couple things that happen. Like, his nephew comes to visit, and he like doesn't really like her at first, but she's like, you know, I'm gonna do what I need to do to make sure that your uncle is happy. I'm gonna to be the best person that I know how to be. There's a part where they end up going on a vacation, and then we kind of get introduced to his ex, or the possibility of meeting his ex-wife. So that's where I'm at right now with the series. I believe that I gave all 3 of those volumes 4 stars. So I'm excited to continue the rest of the series and see where it goes. And the last things that I ended up reading were 2 picture books. The first thing is The First Blade of Sweetgrass by Suzanne Greenlaw. This is about a young girl who ends up going out to pick her first blades of sweetgrass with her grandmother, and because of the nature of where they're located, she has to learn how to decipher the sweetgrass from other marsh grasses that are there, and her grandmother is teaching her. She gets really frustrated, and her grandmother was like, you know, you have to relax. So at some point she relaxes, and she starts to attempt to feel the vibe of her ancestors in order to help her pick those first blades of sweetgrass. It just was a great picture book, and honestly, the art typically wouldn't work for me because it looks like it's heavily done in like pastels or color pencils. It's really rough, and I'm not a huge fan of that. Then the nature scenes were absolutely beautiful, but I think that it brings this level of calmness and serenity that I appreciated. And as our main character is trying to find that level of peace and learning how to pick her first blades of sweetgrass, I think the reader gets that feelings too. Plus, there's a lot of great cultural history here that I think a lot of people would appreciate. This definitely made me want to pick up the nonfiction book Braiding Sweetgrass. So if you're kind of looking for a younger version of, and it's not that it's the same thing, but I think that if you're looking to pick up more books by Native and Indigenous authors featuring Native and Indigenous characters, this is one of those books that can be added to your selection list. And the last picture book that I read is Where Three Oceans Meet. And by the way, I don't think these 2 are out yet either. I don't think these are ones that I read in advance. I don't think they've been released yet. But Where Three Oceans Meet is about Sejal and her mother and Patty, who's her grandmother, and they travel to a certain point in India where 3 of the oceans meet in it. Don't ask me what the 3 oceans are because I forget off the top of my head, but they travel to a point in India where the 3 oceans meet. And this is interesting because it's about more than just where the 3 oceans meet physically. It is a great geographical read, meaning that learning about different areas in India, and it's done in very vibrant colors, very beautiful. But it's about how those 3 main characters continue to connect with each other time and time again, even though they're thousands of miles away from each other, which is why it's 3 oceans meet. But it is about these 3 souls, these 3 beings, these 3 strong women who connect with each other time and time again, and not allowing distance to kind of stop them from being able to do so. But I enjoyed that one, and I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. All right, y'all, so that was an extremely long wrap up. Like I said, if I end up reading as much as I read like last month, this month, I'm gonna have to do a mid-month because like my jaw literally is about to lock because I've been talking so much. So with that being said, I won't keep you much longer. Let me know in the comment box below what you read in I was about to say in February, what you read in July that you really enjoyed. Let me know in the comment box below. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more content, click the subscribe button, hit the bell for notifications. If you're looking for ways to support this channel, follow me on social media. All the links will be down in the description box below. And I just realized, y'all, after all of that, I still forgot a book. I read Batman 3 Jokers. If you want to know how I felt about this, just check out my Goodreads review because, listen, I can't talk anymore. It literally is about 3 Jokers, like 3 versions of Joker that exist at the same time that are torturing Batman, Red Hood, and Batgirl. It is really good. I loved it. I think it was done super well. Very intriguing, very dark, but yeah, just check it out. All right, y'all. I will be back with another video soon. Bye.